irreversibly injured, and there's no way for you to identify what the initial type of injury or which of these four compartments was initially injured. Now, for this slide review, I decided to go through these four compartments, no? When we review these diseases. So, the following three conditions involves injury that initially started with the renal tubules and the surrounding interstitium. So among those conditions, you have your acute pyelonephritis, your renal abscess, and actually your chronic pyelonephritis is already an end-stage renal disease where basically all the four compartments are already involved. So this one is acute pyelonephritis. So what's the most common cause of acute pyelonephritis? So ascending infection, starting from the urethra or the urinary bladder, the bacterial agent goes up the ureters and ends up in the kidneys, causing this condition. So in acute pyelonephritis, so the term itself, pyelo, there is an increased number of neutrophils inside the kidney, causing pus formation. And you will see here, this is actually the kidney already at low power. Those long slit-like spaces are actually your elongated renal tubules. But you cannot make up the lumen of these renal tubular structures because they are filled with inflammatory cell infiltrates. Okay. So take this one for example. Okay, so if you look at this one, that is a renal tubule that is stretched out, and inside you would see inflammatory cells. These are neutrophils, and you would also notice that part of the lining epithelium is already eroded or is already slapped off. So another one here, a more narrow renal tubular structure, and you would see inside there is this hazy strip that's actually mucus, no? A proteinaceous material, you call it your horsefall protein. So remember that even in its disease state, urine still passes through these renal tubular structures, and whatever cells are found inside these renal tubules, those are the ones that you will see being flushed out in the urine of your patients. So, like in this scenario, what do you think when you do the urinalysis of this patient? What do you think are the microscopic findings that you would see? Presence of WBC, so pyuria that is present in the urine. What else? Protein, so you would see mucus, no, streaks under the microscope. Now also remember that this mucoid material will also tend to encase your WBCs and even your eroded renal tubular cells. And what happens is when these are encased in mucus, they will appear as what? Your WBC casts. So you can also see that in patients with urinary tract infection or acute pyelonephritis. So aside from WBC cast, you would also see renal tubular epithelial cell casts. Now, remember also that as days go by without, or even with antibiotic treatment, some of these WBCs, some of these renal tubular epithelial cells will gradually disintegrate. And when these incasted and disintegrated WBCs are flushed out in the urine, they appear as what type of cast? These are now your coarse granular cast, fine granular casts. So what is the significance of a urinalysis report where most of your casts are already fine granular casts? Huh? It's an acute, still part of the pyelonephritis disease, but more or less it's a condition that happens a little bit later, because at the onset of the pyelonephritis, what you would see are just WBCs, no, pyuria in the urine, mucus streaks. A few days later, you would see coarse granular casts. Still a few more days later, you would see already fine granular casts. So more or less, by looking simply at the urinalysis report of your patient, you will already have an idea as to how long the condition has been there. Okay, aside from that, what else? You would also see that now in any form of inflammation or any form of infection, there will always be, as part of the response of the tissue, there will always be vascular congestion. So because of increased blood flow to the area of inflammation to bring more inflammatory cells. So you would also notice that the congested So here in this, sorry about that. Here in this slide, you will see no red blood cells. So this is because of some of the capillary vessels in the vicinity of inflammation are ruptured. So you would notice that there is mild hemorrhage in the background. And some of these extravasated red blood cells will also find their way inside the renal tubules. And once urine passes through, they are also flushed out. So in patients with acute pyelonephritis, it's also normal to see red blood cells in their urine. Although most often, as you can see in this picture, it will be overwhelmed by the much larger number of WBCs. So you will have more of pyuria and fewer instances of hematuria in the urine of these patients. Now, I mentioned earlier that in an acute condition, it only involves one or two compartments of the kidney. Like in this case, that it only involves the renal tubules and the surrounding interstitium. So you would also notice that in acute cases of infection or inflammation, I've seen a few more. So again, these are the WBC casts inside the renal tubular structures. Okay. In some instances, you are going to see, I'm not sure if you are going to I'll try to see if I can find again another very large WBC cast. Another one here. I think there are plenty in this area. So these are all WBC casts. Okay, I'll try to see if I can find a glomerulus. So more here. These are all WBC casts. And here you can see even a sign of a beginning of an abscess formation, which is a complication of your acute pyelonephritis. And here you will see a congested blood vessel. No? So once that one ruptures, there will be extravasation of red blood cells in the surrounding tissues, and then you will also see hematuria in the urine. Okay, unfortunately, we cannot see any normal glomerulus in this slide. But usually, you would see that the glomerular, okay, here's one, but it is not very well preserved. So this one is a lonely glomerulus, and you notice that even if the surrounding area is filled with inflammatory cell infiltrates, you would see that the Bowman space is very, very clean. And it's not part or it's not affected by the surrounding inflammatory process. So this is just what I meant that in the initial kidney injury, the insult always starts with either one or two of the four compartments of the kidney. So with time, either the patient has an immunocompromised state or the antibiotic treatment is not started. The condition becomes more ominous, no? Progresses, and one of the complications to your acute pyelonephritis is this one. So you have encountered this already before. This is your renal abscess. So complication of acute pyelonephritis. By the way, for patients with acute pyelonephritis, what is the classic triad of symptoms? Dysuria, what else? Flank pain, one more. Fever and chills. So usually in females, if the patient has fever accompanied by chills, almost always when you do a kidney punchline, positive dementia. So this is the renal abscess formation. No? Again, what pattern of necrosis? Liquefied necrosis. So notice also, so your acute pyelonephritis, your renal abscess is a complication of your acute pyelonephritis. Now, what would happen to your renal abscess? What would be a possible complication to your renal abscess? What will happen to your patient if the abscess is not treated or it is not drained or evacuated? Although most of the time we only do antibiotic treatment for kidney abscess. It could potentially lead to renal insufficiency. What else? Sepsis. What else? Notice here, this is the edge of the tissue already. So over here, this is already the renal capsule, and the edge of your abscess is already here. What's another potential complication? What will happen? You have a very, very thin capsule. The edge of your abscess is already here. Rupture. Good. So, with time, this abscess will still grow, no? Particularly if you do not start antibiotic treatment. So, when this rupture, there will be spillage of pus into the surrounding tissue. So, you can have perinephric abscess, which is more dangerous and more harder to treat than your renal abscess, because aside from seepage into the retroperitoneal space, it can also lead to intra-abdominal, the seepage, or even up the lungs, pulmonary. So by then, your patient is more likely to develop sepsis at the same time go to shock. So you don't take lightly, when you have a case of acute pyelonephritis or urinary tract infection. Again, just to emphasize here, at the edge of the abscess, you would see here, glomerular structures, and notice the interface, the clean interface of Bowman space. And the seemingly normal area here. Okay. So, later still, from acute pyelonephritis, if your patient is immunocompromised or antibiotic treatment is not started, or if the antibiotic treatment even is not able to neutralize the bacteria has somehow developed mechanisms to evade the effects of the bacteria, the antibiotic. The patient will later develop chronic pyelonephritis. So in chronic pyelonephritis, it could be a complication brought about by recurrent acute pyelonephritis or urinary tract infection, or it could be a result of a kidney stone, which is uro or nephrolithiasis. And in most instances, in many instances of chronic pyelonephritis, the inciting stimulus is uro or nephrolithiasis. So what happens is a kidney stone is lodged at the area near the pelvocalicial system of the kidneys. Your kidneys. So this area over here, your renal calyces. So if a stone forms here, and your urine is formed every second, every minute, so the outlet obstruction will lead to the urine staying here. So it will lead to hydronephrosis, which is edema of the kidneys. So the urine that stays inside the kidney will injure the tissue and will lead to dropout necrosis or apoptosis, at the same time wide areas of necrosis. So eventually that would lead to large areas of the kidney being replaced by fibrous tissue, like this one. Wide areas of fibrosis, because some cells and tissues in the kidney, when they are injured, will no longer grow back or will no longer be replaced by normal cells, parenchymal cells of the kidneys, and just are replaced by fibrous connective tissue. Now there are 4 tissue hallmarks for your chronic pyelonephritis. The first one is this: thyroidization of the kidneys or the renal tubules. So, the chronic inflammatory process, the chronic injury to the tissues will lead to fibrosis in the surrounding tissue. Once your fibrous tissue will contract, your once elongated renal tubular structures become more compressed so that they will appear rounder. or more ovoid. And since there is a continuous inflammatory process, the irritated renal tubular cells will secrete this thick homogeneous material or sometimes hyalin material, which would give you the impression that the kidney has undergone thyroidization. So this is reminiscent of your thyroid follicles. So this is one manifestation. The second manifestation for chronic pyelonephritis is fibrosis, tissue fibrosis. Because this is chronic pyelonephritis, so chronic inflammation. So you will also see chronic inflammatory cell infiltrates. That's the third feature. And the fourth feature would be vascular, no? Arteriosclerosis. So the blood vessels, because of massive fibrosis, so as tissue fibrosis contracts, the blood vessels will also close. So in order to deliver the necessary oxygen and nutrition to the surrounding tissues, what happens is there will be mechanisms activated to open these blood vessels, and there would be increased thickness in the walls of these blood vessels. That's why it will have arteriosclerosis, thickening and hardening of the walls of these blood vessels, so that they are less collapsible in response to the compressing the tissue fibrosis in the background. You will see here, these are blood clots inside the thickened blood vessel wall. So this is chronic pyelonephritis. Notice also that some of the, because this is already end-stage renal disease, so all the four compartments, so there are already changes in the blood vessels, there is fibrosis in the tissue parenchyma, there is injury to your tubular structures. The fourth compartment, which are your glomerular structures, are also damaged. So notice here that your glomerular structures, the glomeruli are hyalinized. So all the four compartments of the kidney at this point are already damaged. So here, you can see these dark granular structures. These are your chronic inflammatory cell infiltrates. So again, for chronic pyelonephritis, 4 expected histologic changes associated with the condition. You have thyroidization of the kidneys, tissue fibrosis, arteriosclerosis, and presence of your chronic inflammatory cell infiltrates. You can also add hyalinization of your glomerular structures, but those 4 are the most important ones. Here again, you can see more hyalinized glomerular units. Here. Then we come to glomerular injury. So for glomerular injury, or the different forms of glomerulonephritis, you have nephrotic or nephritic syndrome. So mechanism, why is there injury to the glomerular units? It's because of immune complexes, the most common reason. So antigen-antibody reaction that can occur elsewhere, and these immune complexes are carried by your blood. They get entrapped inside your glomerular structures and they cause an inflammatory reaction. Or it could be an antibody that is formed by certain organisms like in streptococcal, post-infectious streptococcal glomerulonephritis, wherein antibodies to M proteins of the streptococcal bacteria will not only neutralize the bacteria, but will also attack certain tissues of the body, like the cardiac valves as well as the structures inside your glomeruli. So, first case here is acute glomerulonephritis. So, in this condition, because this is an acute condition, it's only the glomerular compartment that will show you the pathology. It's actually very easy to identify during practical exams or even during my monthly. If during practicals, if the diagnosis involves glomerular injury, so you have here acute glomerulonephritis, you have lupus nephritis or SLE of the kidneys, diabetic nephropathy, and amyloid. Most often, if you look at the microscope during practical exams, it is either set at low power or high power, and at the center would be the glomerulus. So that will give you an idea na you are looking at a glomerular pathology, not a tubular, interstitial, or blood vessel. So it would be much easier for you to come up with a diagnosis because there are only 4 slides with this condition. So in acute glomerulonephritis, what happens is the immune complexes get entrapped inside the glomerular structures. They elicit an inflammatory reaction. Now, one of the characteristics of acute glomerulonephritis is hypercellularity of your glomeruli. Notice they appear darker and there is a dense collection of these dot-like particles. These are actually the nuclei of the cells inside. So the hypercellularity is brought about by the proliferation of your endothelial cells, mesangial cells, and your epithelial cells. So these are the 3 cells that make up your glomerular structure, plus the presence of inflammatory cells that are triggered by the presence of the intra-immune complexes. So you have a densely stained glomerular structures. Another thing that you would notice for acute glomerulonephritis, AGN. Anyway, for cases of AGN, the condition is often, remember your global and diffuse. So, global, when you hear the term or read the term global, it means that the entire globe of the glomerulus is affected or will show you the pathology. So notice here the almost equal distribution of the cellular elements as a response to the hypercellularity. So that's global. So the entire globe of the glomerulus. The term diffuse is meaning to say all the glomerular structures in this diseased kidney will show you the pathology. So hypercellularity in all. You would see this often in autoimmune diseases. So all, if you look at this slide, so that's diffuse. Certain conditions will only show you some parts, probably 1 or 2 in an area, and the rest are normal. So that's focal. And then the other, global versus segmental, and you have your focal versus diffuse. So for glomerulonephritis, lupus nephritis, it's always global, including amyloidosis. So global, the entire globe of the glomerulus, diffuse, all the glomeruli in that diseased kidney. Certain diseases like diabetic nephropathy, only focal. So only some of the glomeruli are damaged and segmental. If you stretch out this globe of the coil capillaries inside the glomerulus, only a segment of that will show you the pathology. That's the term segmental. So for this acute glomerulonephritis, it's global and diffuse. So all it's dark staining. Okay, so that's acute glomerulonephritis. Next slide is lupus nephritis or SLE of the kidneys. During practical exams, if you have your slides, the label of this slide is SLE kidney, but the correct diagnosis is lupus nephritis. So during practical exams, it's better to use the term lupus nephritis rather than SLE kidney because depending on who checks your paper, you will have a better chance of getting it correct when you write lupus nephritis. Okay. Now, in lupus nephritis, again, this is also an autoimmune. So, once autoimmune, always remember that it's global and diffuse. So, the typical lesion in lupus nephritis are those what you call wire loop lesions. So, there is thickening of the basement membrane of your glomeruli. So these are your capillary vessels, and then it's corresponding basement membrane. So notice that the basement membrane is thickened. They will have thicker walls on. You can see it even here. The lumen is already closed because of the severely thickened basement membrane. So, rounded or loop-like. So if you're a medtech, if you recall, you have this instrument in microbiology you use to plant bacteria, wire loop. That's why the term wire loop lesions. So this is pathognomonic of lupus nephritis. So wire loop lesion, diffuse, and global. Now, depending on the severity of the condition, you would also see injury to the surrounding tissues. But at the onset, it always starts with the glomerular structures. Here you can see inflammation in the interstitium. There's apparent injury to the cells lining your renal tubules. Now, in lupus nephritis, the thickening of the basement membrane would lead to contraction of the glomerular structures, so that you would notice that you will have a wider, because of the tissue contraction, glomerular contraction, you have a wider Bowman space. So again, very visible na thickened basement membrane, no? The wire loop lesions. Okay. Next slide is diabetic nephropathy. So during practicals, you really need to differentiate lupus nephritis from your diabetic nephropathy. Although in many instances, they are either placed side by side or one station after the other so that you will not be at a loss. In diabetic nephropathy, although this is also a sort of an end-stage renal disease, but at the onset, there are also injuries na specific only to the glomeruli. Now, what is one of the most important differentiation of the two? Okay, very good. So that's one of the things that can readily help you distinguish one from the other. The interface, no, the Bowman space. In lupus nephritis, contracted and glomeruli, so you will have a wider. Whereas in diabetic nephropathy, it's not contracted. And looking at that, you might think that there are wire loop lesions. You might be tempted to think that there are wire loop lesions. But actually, the basement membrane are very, very thin. It's just you would be tempted to look at this open ba. The capillary vessels inside are open, and it would give you the notion that they have thickened basement membranes, but actually they don't have. If you look at this area, notice this very, very thin line. That's how thin the basement membrane of this, very thin already, like strands over here. It's just that the capillary vessels are so much open that you might have the impression that those are typical wire lesions, but not. What is the typical lesion for your diabetic nephropathy is your nodular. What nodular? Glomerulosclerosis, or FSGS, focal segmental glomerulosclerosis. So remember, focal, not all the glomerular structures will show this, and segmental. So if this entire globe, this entire globe of the glomeruli is a coil capillary. If you stretch it out, only a segment of that will show you glomerulosclerosis. Glomerulosclerosis is thickening and narrowing of the segment of the glomerular capillary. So it's only a segment of that. And you would notice that those sclerotic parts are the ones that are darker in color, and they would appear nodular. That's why the term nodular glomerulosclerosis. And it's only this segment. The rest over here, getting an area, this is still considered normal. So only a segment. And focal, only some of the glomerular structures will show you the pathology. Again, to emphasize the narrow Bowman space as compared to your lupus nephritis and nodular na. Only a few areas which show you condensed, hyperdense areas. Or like this one over here, nodular, while the rest are still normal. Okay, so that's for your diabetic nephropathy. So another differential diagnosis, although this one is a little bit easier to spot compared to your diabetic nephropathy and lupus nephritis, is amyloidosis. Amyloid Amyloidosis is a condition no, wherein there are abnormally folded proteins. And since we do not have the mechanism to process them, metabolize them, they are deposited in the tissues. So, what happens is the amyloid material, which is a pink homogeneous material that is often smooth, gets deposited in the glomeruli. So, this one is close to your diabetic nephropathy because of the narrowed or obliterated Bowman space. But what can readily differentiate this one from your diabetic nephropathy is this smooth, glassy appearance no, of your amyloid bodies that are deposited. This one is also global and diffuse. Okay? This is a sort of an autoimmune condition. So, global, the entire globe of the glomerulus. Diffuse, all the glomerular structures. So, this one, you can see it also down here. Another one. Now, in amyloidosis, it's not only inside the glomerular structures, but also in the walls of the renal tubules, walls of the blood vessels, as well as in the interstitium. Another, and you can see it here. This is a rounded renal tubular structure where streaks of amyloid bodies are deposited. So these three are the ones that are very important to differentiate. No? Glomerulonephritis with their hypercellular, dark staining glomeruli. Then you have your lupus nephritis with their typical wire-loop lesion. Your diabetic nephropathy with their pathognomonic nodular sclerosis. And then this one, amyloidosis. So the clue here is during practicals, you will always see a glomerulus at the center, and often the microscope is set at medium or high power because that would give you an idea that there are certain details pathognomonic to the lesion that are being focused on. Okay. Now we come to the last 4 slides, and this we start with benign. So angiolipoma. So these ones are attached to the surface of the kidney. So from the term itself, angio, so you see this large blood vessel. This is its wall. Inside this is a blood clot. Now the size of the blood vessel can vary from one tumor to another. In some instances, you will see a blood vessel and then surrounding it, you have your myocardium, smooth muscle cells. That's why the tumor could be angiolipoma. Angio if it's only made up of blood vessels, and lipoma, meaning fat globules. But in instances where there is an increased number of smooth muscle cells in the background, you can have angiomyolipoma. But either of those, you can just use angiolipoma as the diagnosis, or you can write angiomyolipoma. Both can be considered correct. So, the amount of smooth muscle cells, blood vessels, and fat globules will vary from one tumor to another. So what's one complication of this one? Angiomyolipoma. This is a benign tumor, but one of its complications is this one. Notice this. This is a large blood vessel, and this area over here is already the blood clot. No? So if this is a fresh tumor, that's a very, very big clot. So some of the blood vessels in your angiomyolipoma are situated on the surface of the tumor. So during surgical excision of the tumor, if the doctor is not very careful, the doctor can accidentally cut through the blood vessel and there could be massive bleeding. There are also instances that because of the size of the tumor, the blood vessel rather, which is the component of the tumor, the increased size of the blood vessel can lead to a very narrow or thinning of its blood vessel walls. That can also lead to spontaneous rupture. So bleeding, hemorrhage could be a possible complication in this benign tumor, which is your angiolipoma or angiomyolipoma. So this one is very hard to miss, no? Quite impossible to miss this. You just see this white fat globules, then you can see this pink material, which is your smooth muscle cells and then blood vessels. Okay. So we only have one malignant tumor, the rest are, one benign tumor, the rest are malignant tumors. The next slide is renal cell carcinoma. Renal cell carcinoma is the most common form of kidney cancer in adults. So age of onset is usually 50 to 60 years old. And it presents with a classic triad. What's the classic triad of symptoms? Still recall? Okay, flank pain, flank mass, and gross hematuria. So I think I mentioned it in class no. The gross hematuria, those of you who have seen a pig slaughter no, for lechon, diba they would also keep the blood for dinuguan. So if you notice the curdled blood, that's the type of urine you see in these patients with renal cell carcinoma. That's gross hematuria. Because the other one is microscopic hematuria, wherein there's the color of the urine is slightly orange or slightly brown. But this one, that's the typical kind of blood kept for dinuguan. It's in dark red, curdled blood. That's what you see in the urine of this patient. So, your renal cell carcinoma, again I mentioned, most common kidney cancer in adults, 50 to 60, or some books would say 50 to 70 years of age. The tumor is often located at either pole of the kidney. So it could be in the superior pole of the kidney, or it could be on the inferior pole of the kidney. It is its fresh color when in its fresh state during surgical procedures. It's yellowish in color, and it elaborates certain hormones. So it's capable of paraneoplastic syndrome, and its most common manifestation in paraneoplastic syndrome is erythrocytosis. So most patients with cancer will develop anemia. But for patients with renal cell carcinoma, they will present with erythrocytosis. So they will have high red blood cell count, high hemoglobin, and hematocrit levels at the onset. Now, the tumor is this one. So, and then going down. It's paler in color to the normal atrophied kidney. This is the one. So, because as the tumor grows in size, it would compress on the normal kidney, and the normal kidney will atrophy. So, it gets denser in color. Notice that although the tumor is well delineated, its borders are well defined, it is not encapsulated, which is a sign of cancer. Cancers are not, that's why their invasive nature is brought about by these tumors not encapsulated. So it's well defined, but it's not encapsulated. The tumor cells are paler in color than the normal kidneys. And if you look at it at higher magnification, this is what you will see. So, the tumor, renal cell carcinoma has 4 variants, man. You have your clear cell type, papillary type, your collecting duct, and the, I think, transitional, I forgot, you just review your notes, transitional type. The most common one, which is this one, is the clear cell type. And you can look at it. No, at the individual tumor cell level, you would see that the tumor cells have this large clear cytoplasm and they have a small rounded nuclei that could either be at the center or slightly off center or eccentric. So that's why the term clear cell variant. So, okay. Again, your atrophied na renal tubular structures compressed by your tumor here. Notice, there are no capsules. These are already your thyroidization of your renal tubules that are also injured. So, not encapsulated but well defined. And clear cytoplasm, small rounded eccentric nuclei. Often the diagnosis of this tumor will be poor. During surgical excision, doctors would tend to remove a portion of the renal vein. And oftentimes, when the tumor has already involved and extended into the renal vein, the prognosis will be poorer. There are also instances that the tumor will outgrow its blood supply so that there would be large areas of necrosis or sometimes areas of hemorrhage. Okay. So that's renal cell carcinoma, most common kidney cancer in adults, 50 to 60 or 50 to 70 years of age. This one is also related to smoking and alcohol drinking and renal cell carcinoma. The next slide is the most common form of kidney cancer in children. And age of onset is between 2 to 5 years of age. So that is Wilms tumor or nephroblastoma. So most common kidney cancer in children. Again, where is the location of this tumor? When a parent, a mother, or a father brings their child to the clinic, where do you think is the location of the mass? That is often the reason why the child is brought. The mother will say, well, I was dressing up my child, I felt this rounded tumor. Intra-abdominal, correct? Particularly infra-umbilical region. And if you recall, our kidneys are on our flanks, man. Are on the sides. But you cannot palpate this one on the sides. Once they are palpable, you will notice that they are centrally located. Infra-umbilical mass. And the tumor is made, is this one. Down below. Up here is the atrophied kidney. And in the atrophied part of the kidney, you can still see a few glomerular structures. Notice this one. But there is massive fibrosis in the background. You see, the fibrotic tissue has replaced all the renal tubular structures. There are no renal tubular structures, only those 5 atrophied glomeruli. So this area below is the tumor. And this tumor is made up of 3 cellular elements. One are your blastemal or blastema. Blastemal cells. What's the other one? Number 2 are your either glomeruloid bodies. Or abortive tubules. It's like primitive renal tubules. That's the second component of the tumor. And then the third one are your elongated, no, or spindle cells. These are elongated cells, like strips, and then the nuclei is at the center. Elongated spindle cells. So we look at those. So these rounded cells right here, these are all your blastema. And then notice this area, there are elongated cells inside. These are your spindle cells. Again, the volume of your blastema, your abortive tubules, and your spindle cells will vary from one tumor to another. This one just happens that there are more blastema cells as compared to the other cellular components. So again, your spindle cells, your blastema. These rounded structures are your glomeruloid bodies. So most often the glomeruloid bodies or your abortive tubules are located inside your blastemal cells. We look at this other slide. Okay, this one will have again your blastema, and then if you notice, this one, mga renal tubular, primitive renal tubular structures. You can see that they are lined by, okay. These are now your abortive tubules. Elongated, they have this lumen, and the lining is sort of a tall columnar cell. Then here, these are your round blastemal cells. There's another one. Abortive tubules. And of course, these are your spindle cells, no? Mga elongated cells. Notice their nuclei is also elongated. So these are the three cellular components that make up your Wilms tumor. So blastema, abortive tubules or glomeruloid bodies, and then your elongated cells or your spindle cells. Last slide would be transitional cell carcinoma. This one is also associated with smoking and drinking. So this one grows in the urinary bladder. So transitional or pseudostratified columnar epithelium. And they grow inside the urinary bladder. So normally, your urinary bladder is lined by transitional cells or transitional epithelium. And your transitional epithelium is normally, if you count the number of nucleus, no, it's just 4 to 6 cell layers thick. So if you count from the basement membrane going up, there should only be 4 to 6 layers of nuclei piling on top of each other. But notice, In this tumor, there are more than 6 nuclei piling on top of each other. I'm not sure if you still remember your normal histology, but what do you call these topmost cells? Very good, umbrella cells. So they look like umbrella because in your the cells are usually rounded, no? But when they reach the topmost layer, your umbrella cells look like umbrellas. They are flatter on one side, like that. Now, in malignancies, you would notice that aside from the increased thickness of the wall, there will also be disappearance of your umbrella cells. Initially, increased thickening of the wall, because here you can still see umbrella cells, although this is already transitional carcinoma. But in areas where the tumor is much thicker and cell lining, like this one, you will no longer see the umbrella cells over here. So notice how very thick the lining of this tumor. So the prognosis of this tumor becomes more ominous or poorer if the tumor has already invaded the underlying muscular layer. What's your muscular layer of the urinary bladder? What do you call that muscle? Your detrusor. So once there is involvement or invasion of the tumor into the detrusor muscle, the prognosis is poorer. What is the complication if there is already invasion, particularly large areas of invasion into the detrusor muscle? What's one potential complication to that? Rupture. Because the muscle wall of your urinary bladder will become weaker. And if you have the habit of not voiding your urine consistently or regularly, you tend to wait until you are at the point of bursting. There's a danger of having rupture. Although there will also be associated signs. Notice this one, lobules. These are signs of invasion into the underlying muscular layer. These are your invasive point of your tumor. So, technically speaking, this patient has a poorer prognosis. Patients with transitional cell carcinoma will also present with hematuria. So you need to differentiate this from patients with renal cell carcinoma because that one will also present with hematuria. So that's the end of our slide review this morning. Do you have any questions? When is our schedule for the practicals? This Wednesday? So after sa kuan, do you have class sa Monday? Wala? Okay, sige. So thank you very much for coming to class.